everyone, to the October edition of the New York Space Business Roundtable. We are very glad to see you here. 1 week early, obviously, because next week many of us are going to be in California. So we're very happy to be here today for the kickoff of our Cislunar 2.1. We're revisiting the question of Cislunar for this quarter, asking the question, will anyone visit your grave on the moon? So with that, I would like to let you know that the chat box is open, but while you're in this space, actually you are unable to mute yourself.
Oh, Tamara froze.
Well, I disappeared for a minute. Don't know what happened there. But thank you.
Well, we thought we were going to have to come and visit your grave on the moon.
Thankfully, here I am. I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Lou Zacharilla, and Lou, you can take it away.
Thank you, Tamara, and hello, everyone. I usually say if it's the third Wednesday of the month, it's the New York Space Business Roundtable, but as Tamara said, we moved it up a week this week because we'll all be at Space Week out in Mountain View next week, and one of our guests today will actually be out there with me on a panel on the 17th. So we're delighted that you guys made it. And the topic we chose today, will anybody visit your grave on the moon, is really sort of our Halloween special as well. So we're working on themes here. What we're really going to be looking at today is the emergence of the businesses that are beginning to develop as a result of both the Cislunar economy and the explosion of the commercial space economy, which we've been exploring every month here. There are a lot of issues there, and Joe and I and Tamara decided that we would start breaking it down by looking at some niche businesses that are being formed to address this market and its multiple needs. And then, of course, the financing. We think we have a guest today who really understands sort of the unique elements of the new economies that we're developing. So we're going to begin to break it down. We're going to look at some of the businesses, both niche and otherwise. And that's the conversation we're going to have today. And we really, really hope you join in with us. If you have a venture of your own, feel free to let us know about it. And we'll have our panelists ask you questions as well. So with that, Tamara, I think we go to thanking the people who brung us here.
That would be correct.
Wow, I got that right. All right. Well, as always, we don't come to you every third Wednesday of the month if it isn't for somebody helping us along here. And here they are. We really appreciate all of our organizations, our sponsors, of course, Luxembourg's Trade and Investment Office here in New York, Astroscale, Druva Space, the World Teleport Association, the world's only association for operating teleports, ground segment partners, and others, Empire Space, and of course, our media partner, Space News. So again, we really thank them. They've been with us all year, and we hope they're with us next year and the year after that too. We're inviting you to be where we're going to be next week. We will be in Silicon Valley, as we've mentioned before. But there's a special event out there in addition to the panel that Robbie and Robertson and I are on, and that is the Future Leaders Dinner, where we honor the 20 people under 35 in our industry who the industry has chosen as the ones who are going to drive this car or ride this rocket, whatever analogy you want to use going forward. So we hope that you join us there. And I think you can still get tickets, or are we sold out, Tamara?
We are super duper close to being sold out. So if you want a ticket, buy it now.
Yeah, it's a great networking event. And again, you meet the CEOs who may actually hire you in the future. So that's October 18th in the evening at the History of Computing Museum. And we don't have space news today. Our Significant Digits reporters, Deborah Werner and Jason Rainbow, had another assignment today. They're somewhere else because they're usually here the third Wednesday of the month. So what we thought we would do to kind of start you off is replay a conversation we had with a company that is in a niche business in space, which is space burial. And it's a real thing. They are burying people in space now. So there's something you can look forward to. But it's a great business model, believe it or not. I did a podcast with the president of the company. And I think what Tamara's got for us is a little segment of that. And, just to kind of get us going and thinking about what we're going to be speaking about today. So Tamara, with that, let's go to outer space.
This is the launch conductor in mission control. We pause at this moment in our countdown to remember and honor the lives of each of the participants on the Celestis Memorial spaceflight. Their presence on this flight signifies a commitment to the opening of the space frontier shared by all of us. We wish the friends and families present today and all those who are with us in spirit all over the world Godspeed, good luck, and our thanks for allowing us to share this very personal time with you today. Elsie out. 5 vehicles armed. 3, 2, 1, fire. Missile away.
But Colby, aside from the fact that it's sort of a human fantasy or instinct, what was the genesis of this idea for you and Charles and the team?
Well, it started way back in 19. Well, I think it might have even started earlier in 1990. It was in 1980s. Charlie was, and this was well before I joined the company, and so Charlie was looking for a way to continue commercial space, because Charlie was with another company called Space Services Inc. of America. And president of that company was the famous Deke Slayton, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. And Charlie and Deke, along with David Hanna, those guys started commercial space. They launched the very first commercial rocket, which a lot of people don't realize, but it's really a really cool thing for our history. It's hard to compete with NASA. And so Charlie was trying to think of a lucrative business that would be out of the competing space of NASA. And there was a small company called the Celestis Group in Melbourne, Florida. And they kind of worked through it and ended up founding the company in 1994. And back then it was difficult, to find a rocket, a ride to space, as you can imagine. We don't have that problem today, but back in the mid 90s, that was one of the hardest things to get the company going, was to find that first ride. But yeah, it was a brainchild of our co-founder, Charlie Chafer.
Yeah, Charlie Chafer. Yeah, well, that's just a little bit of a teaser for that as to how the company got going. But it is a real company. As a matter of fact, they've launched or are about to launch, I think on ULA, Tamara, the remains of 4 ex-presidents, the DNA of 4 ex-presidents, all dead. I mean, they're all dead. And they also are, I think, the Roddenberrys, Gene Roddenberry and his wife, have been on a Celestis crew. So it's a great business, and it's not that expensive. They're not a sponsor of mine, but for those of us in the industry, it's a very exciting thing, and he's making money. It's a great business model. And what you saw at the end was the podcast that you can listen to at our SSPI.org/podcasts, so wherever you get your podcasts, and you can hear the whole conversation with Colby Youngblood. So we thought that was a good way to get us going today. And Tamara, I don't know if you know this, Joe and I signed you up for a flight. So you're
so much. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, you're up there. Okay. Having said that, hopefully 100 years from now, let's get going with the conversation with our guests today. And I'm going to welcome them, assuming I've done all my housekeeping. I have, Tamara, yes? Yes, I have. Okay. Well, we're going to be talking today with two gentlemen. The third gentleman that we had scheduled unfortunately had a family emergency. So we're going to speak today with Micah Walter Range and Dr. Robbie Robertson about the things that they've got going, and we're really looking forward to that. Let me give you a little background. For the past 2 years, Micah Walter Range has been the managing director of Community in Space, which some of you may know about, but if you don't, they analyze, guide, invest, and manifest strategic financial outcomes for space and space-related companies through the development of a range of financial vehicles. It's a minority and veteran-led venture between Kalis Partners and Procure Purpose, focused on, this is key to our conversation today, the next generation of space portfolio development and financing support for the different entities. You just saw one wishing to enter, invest, or grow our industry. Micah is a 15-year space industry research expert who, among other things, led the development of a model for the global space economy. He created the S-Network Space Index, tracked by the UFO ETF, and served as a founder of two companies focusing on the intersection of space and finance. Finally, he serves as president for Kalis Partners, as well as an advisor to our government here in the United States, as well as foreign governments on the space economy and industrial base development. He's a leading expert on the global space economy and the technologies that impact the development of it. And he's quoted, you'll see him in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. I think he's been on NPR, ABC News, Bloomberg, The Economist. But of course, no bigger thrill for him than to be on the roundtable today. Micah, welcome.
Thank you. And yes, it is a thrill. It's certainly good to have a more open dialogue where we can just share what's on our mind. It's much more productive than many of those other venues.
Okay, thank you. And we'll get into it in a second, but I also wanted to introduce you to Dr. Robbie Robertson. As I mentioned, Robbie is going to be on a panel with me next week at Silicon Valley as well. But Robbie is the CEO and co-founder of Sedaro, which is just a fascinating company. They're referred to as a digital twin cloud software company. Dr. Robertson has nearly 20 years experience developing space simulation software and space hardware. Robbie has held research positions at Los Alamos, AFRL, the German Quest Center, and with the National Science Foundation, installing weather instruments on the Antarctic Plateau, space weather instruments. He was previously the first employer at Abios, which, again, you may know about them. They were formerly Cubic Aerospace, I think, where he led the development of instruments and subsystems for spacecraft headed to LEO, GEO, and the moon. He has got a bachelor's degree and his PhD in applied physics he's a Hokie from Virginia Tech. Robbie, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. You did call us niche, I think, in the intro, but that's okay. I'll take it.
You'll take that. Okay.
Yeah.
Niche in a good way, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And also with us today, and you'll hear from him intermittently when he has questions, but also he'll give his reaction to our conversation today. Joe Fargnoli, my buddy here who runs the New York Space Alliance, and he's the founder of that organization as well. Okay, let's get into it. Mike, I'm going to start with you because this is sort of the broad subject. The next generation, right, of space portfolio development and financing, we think looks a lot different than what we're typically familiar with, especially, the old veterans like me. In your view, having done this now and having developed this model, what are the primary differences? And what should, second question, what should early stage companies with long range plans who want to scale, what should they know about this new environment if they want to become successful like Robbie and others?
Okay. So I guess the question is, do you mean the new environment or the new environment? Because, if you're talking about people who've been in the industry for decades and seen, more the government funded model, Everyone says, okay, well, starting in about 2015, we saw this beginning of the surge in private investment in space companies. I would actually say that cycle has come to a conclusion, at least for some of those companies, where they went through the standard, supposedly commercial approach, where they went out, picked up a whole bunch of VC funding, and then continued to raise successively larger rounds, and finally reached a point where their funders were saying, okay, it's time for an exit. We want to see the exit. Either go sell yourself to one of the primes or some other company, or go public. And so, over the past several years, a fair number of them went public, a little more than a dozen, I think. And depending on when you look at them, at their peak as public companies versus where they are now, they've collectively destroyed more than NASA's annual budget in private capital. So I would argue that process didn't work very well. I'm sure there were some people who made money along the way. I mean, that's always the case. Someone makes money. But did it lead to the creation of stable companies that will be able to continue to access the capital that they need to keep on developing for the long term? I think that's in question for a lot of them. There are still a few that had solid business models before they went public, and they're executing, and they're doing okay. They've been punished along with everyone else who wasn't ready for that, but they are doing okay. So that's what I consider the new model. What we're really trying to do, and what we've been looking at, and the origin.
You're the new model, right?
The new model is to say, how do we do it differently now? How do we not go down that same path where you take the VC money, you have a too short timer on your company that you have to hit certain milestones that, we all know how space technology is. You might not get there. How do you structure your finances differently at this stage as an early stage company so that you don't get caught in these traps down the road? And so that's why, we look at other sources of capital and other potential ways for these startups to make money and access markets outside of space. Because, let's say you have something that's going to take 20 years to develop, to put on the moon. Okay, how are you going to make money on Earth in a related market to sustain your company growth until then? That's probably going to work out a whole lot better than hoping that VCs suddenly develop patience.
Right. So, and again, logically it makes sense. It's a sort of a common sense approach, but obviously you have to execute on that. You've analyzed the situation. So, so how does it vary, Micah? You say other sources of capital. You're thinking more of you've accommodated the length of time required for these businesses to succeed because of the unique nature, perhaps. What's the fundamental difference? What is the how on that?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of it comes from working with the companies themselves and the founders to say, what is your real objective here? Because some founders, and I have no problem with this, they just want to run a company for a handful of years, and then they do want to sell it. They don't really want to build it out and develop it and do all those other things. So a company like that, we might actually not have other recommendations for. We'd say, go ahead, take the VC capital. As long as you're confident, you can hit your milestones and who you plan to sell to. It comes down to, are you setting yourself up to do that properly? Are you keeping your books in order? Some very basic things. There are so many wonderfully, technologically gifted founders that don't know how to run a business and don't even know how to keep track of cash flow so that they can then get the right price for that business when they try to sell it.
You're talking to one of them.
So there's some work that we can do to help those. But then the others, where we're looking at companies and founders who do want to be in it for the long haul, it really is that set of questions. How do you want to build it out? Do you want this to be a business that grows and remains independent for however many decades? If so, can you do it with just the technology that you have right now? Let's say you're a propulsion company. Do you actually need to raise capital and acquire someone else who built spacecraft buses or something like that? Do you need a more comprehensive offering to the market that then lets you tell investors a story that they will believe about how you are actually going to generate those returns for them over time? And then on the financing side, if you're doing that job better than we've seen it done in the past, can you access more conservative sources of capital? Right now, we're working with one of the big banks doing $100 million raise, and we were able to do that for that company because they have a business plan that actually a bank will buy, that it could work, and so it's not seen as that too high risk. Go talk to the VCs; they're the only ones who will believe it. Kind of situation.
Very good. It's kind of like the Sherpa combined with a shrink. I mean, you really get in there and you get intimate with these companies and you really understand their needs and their variances. Thank you for that. Thanks for opening that up that way. Robbie, you were nodding a lot when Micah was speaking, but your business is really designed, as I understand it, to accelerate the ability of a company to get into space. First of all, as I look at Sedaro's model, you guys are going to open up innovation significantly in the industry. But why don't you first describe for us the model and how you developed the model, given the background that I just read about you?
Sure. Well, we kind of came to this software business, as you mentioned, from a hardware company. That company was bootstrapped exclusively, so we were just consulting for everybody from big primes, new space companies. One of them was a commercial lunar lander, so that was the single moon system that you mentioned in my bio there. Getting exposed to all these companies, we realized there was a big opportunity to commoditize the software in the industry the way that we're part of commoditizing the hardware. And since then, since at least that started, maybe 2015 is when I joined, there's been so much rolling up of companies from like the component level businesses, like where we were involved, and the bus businesses, and then those new space bus businesses have been rolled up into primes, like RTX, Raytheon buying Blue Canyon, for example. But we saw a big opportunity that no one was talking about to commoditize the software. That was our background before joining that hardware business. Basically, what we do, leaving the buzzwords out of it, digital twin, multiverse, is we provide people with a differentiated, modern tool for building models of complex systems and simulating them and fusing data from the real world into those sims. That's not a new thing, which helps us a lot because we're not pitching to every customer, you need to be using AI to get utility of what we're doing. If you are, we can support that in a unique way to help you train the AI. But all the traditional engineering tasks that you would use a model to support, we can support that and do it better than a traditional tool. I was nodding a lot because I come from a technical background. I'm naturally cynical, and my co-founders are all technical too. I'm the least cynical and the most kind of reckless of them. Maybe that's why I ended up being a CEO and trying to sell things too. But we saw, we've seen, being in the kind of new space part of the industry for a while, just all the craziness and investment in companies that it seemed like a real stretch, or like they were kind of house of cards because their business is based on other aggressive companies buying into what they're selling. When in reality, the majority of the industry lives off government money, maybe not directly, but if not directly, then indirectly. And so we've chosen to, or ended up kind of organically building the business, not exclusively on a VC backed model. I think I'm cynical enough that, and not a good enough actor, that I would be able to raise the money that some people have raised on just a new space type, totally new concept. So we've done a mix of, mostly SBIR and government funding. And, we're still trying to figure out what the best path forward is. The environment's changing a lot, and the last 6 months have proven us right. Not that I was really anticipating it, but just not being dependent on that really rapid growth capital coming in. So really appreciate Micah's perspective on all that stuff.
Yeah. I want to get back to you with a question, and I see Tamara had a question too. But Micah, when you hear Robbie's description on his analysis of the business model and again how he rationalizes it, what's your reaction to that?
So I absolutely agree.
Free advice here, Robbie. I'm just
with what he said about too many new space companies basing their business model on other new space companies as customers. To take a counterexample, you look at a company like Celestis that we just heard about at the beginning of this. So they have a well-defined market. Everybody dies. Some of those people want to go to space, or their loved ones would like them to go to space. And so then it's fairly straightforward, relatively speaking, to connect those people with service providers who can take them to space, the remains. So, that is a very solid business approach. It doesn't require any speculation. It doesn't require any new inventions. It's just taking what exists and moving it around in a way that produces value and hopefully earns profit, which is the purpose of a business. So yes, I think that's a very reasonable approach. And again, I also agree with Robbie that the government is still the main game in town. And for all the talk that there has been about new commercial markets opening up, I would be curious if anyone has a suggestion as to a commercial space company that would be profitable without its government business. Some of them may be profitable, but if you took that government business away and they just had to do the commercial work, I'm not sure many, if any, would succeed on that front.
That's interesting. So when we talk about our $1.6 trillion industry, rather, you're saying of the bulk of that depends it's in some way, shape, or form on government revenues. Government is customer.
In some way, yes.
Yeah,
that is true.
Yeah. Micah, how are you financed? How are you guys financed?
So Community in Space itself, since it's a joint venture, the two partners, Kalis Partners and Procure Purpose, pool resources and staff, and it generally works out pretty well. So in that sense, we're fortunate because what we're providing people is our services, not technology that we have to go out and build. So it's pretty straightforward for us.
Yeah, services business. Robbie, I want to switch back to you. So as it stands right now, Sedaro's customer base consists of what, when we break it down in terms of percentages?
Primarily, roughly 50% direct to government, like implementation, pilot projects, some active prime contractor support of Space Force programs. All the government stuff right now is DoD. We've had contracts with NASA, but actually that's been a harder nut to crack with our particular technology. But yeah, so 50% that, and then 50% prime contractors. So supporting primes. Sometimes we're funded as a sub on a government contract. Sometimes it's IRAD funding for kind of implementing our software with them, and then licenses. But it's a SaaS model. So software as a service, annual licensing, default enterprise. So it's unlimited headcount because it's a collaborative tool. And then we license it with an interesting model. It's based on basically how much value we bring to them. It's how much compute we unlock on the back end of their software. So if they get a higher tier, they can use more cloud processors. So we can scale with their business, with their use cases. And then they just pay if they're using it for bigger, tougher problems, basically.
Interesting. Actually, I just want to take on Tamara's question here. You said I don't want to get into the words multiverse or digital twin. And of course,
Yeah.
first thing
Not
Tamara
upfront,
asked,
yeah.
is multiverse. In what sense are you using the word there?
Sure. So the two buzzwords, I would say, we provide a cloud SaaS platform for digital twins and the engineering multiverse. So the digital twin part is that when we model a single agent, as we call it, in a simulation, whether it's a spacecraft, and now we're getting into other domains, so an aircraft, for example, or ship or ground station, whatever it is, we allow our users to develop models of all the physics together. So if it's a spacecraft, we're modeling the power system, the control system, the propulsion system, the autonomy software, thermal control, everything together. And that means that the data that you see from the model, from a simulation, say, looks like the actual data you'd see from the system on orbit. That means it's the synthetic data of a quality that you can use to, say, train an AI to operate the system autonomously instead of having a human in the loop. So that's the twin. And then multiverse is capturing the fact that we can, our users can build really massive simulations. So the same technology that allows us to simulate, given the limitations of a single computer, allows us to simulate everything going on with a vehicle. We can apply that to and scale out to many, many vehicles. So we've simulated for a government customer, like 500 plus satellites, all the subsystems together, in a big integrated simulation. So that's like a universe or a big synthetic environment. And then you're in the cloud, so you can naturally, if you have unlocked the tier of our platform that gives you enough compute, you can run each of those that simulation a million times over, or whatever, however many times you want. That's the multiverse. So big synthetic environments and the ability to run any number of them concurrently to do anything. Simulation can drive boring traditional approaches to optimization, so you can optimize your decision making, optimize your design, or it can do fancy, more future, forward-thinking things like generate synthetic data sets to train an AI to now operate that system autonomously.
Got it. The digital twin, it's I did a site visit to Coral Gables, Florida, and they're actually using a digital twin as part of their municipal services. I mean, to do everything in terms of managing their real estate. They've got 44,000 trees down there, all different kinds. They're using the twin to do maintenance. It's in that instance, it's effectively a way to manage infrastructure much more intelligently. Their communication system, they're not digging up the ground because again, they've got the twin. Siemens is big in this space. When Micah talked about other markets that are not space markets, are cities possibly customers of yours, or are they going to be consumers of this?
Yeah, definitely. The differentiated technology we found that we developed in trying to serve these space questions that we came to the technology with, or came to this company with, they're not space specific. They're not even specific to a certain type of physics. Our ability to leverage the scale that's available in cloud computing and just modern software architectures applies to anything. All the special stuff we've built, it's not special because of the space part. It's special because of the software technology. So when we realized that and became really convinced of it is when I felt, given my cynicism, comfortable making a pitch for VC money. Because I didn't have to bank on a commercial or a space market only. And now we're getting into aircraft, and then long term we want to commoditize or commercialize the software, kind of repackage it in a way that is more flexible. Basically opens up to our users everything that our aerospace team does. So it's more like, if you're familiar with gaming engines, Unity or Unreal, but for real systems. So put that tool set out there, less hands-on, more hands-off SaaS model. If someone wants to use it to improve how they manage their city or their satellite, or maybe design a new medicine or a medical treatment, whatever the twin application might be, it could possibly support that.
Micah, one of the things we hear is that the infrastructure is not quite in place for all of the business models that are out there to sort of execute on. We were going to have Ground Space on there talking about their data infrastructure design. But in your view, again, two-part question, as we move from government to maybe more commercial revenues, and as companies like Robbie's continue to come online or want to come online, is it your view that there's a proper both financing and actual industry infrastructure in place to accommodate what we need to do here?
No, absolutely not. It needs to be built. And before I answer that further, Robbie, I really like the way you're thinking about it. And that's fantastic to hear about you expanding into those other markets, because that is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about that a lot of these other companies should have been doing 5-10 years ago, is thinking about that at the earliest possible stage. What else could they do that wouldn't make them completely dependent on space? So when it comes to the technological infrastructure, there are certainly problems. And you think way back to examples like Bigelow Aerospace and the idea of commercial space stations, which we're going through the next round of that with a few different companies right now. But long enough ago, Bigelow Aerospace wanted to build commercial space stations. They thought, well, it'll work because commercial human spaceflight will be available next year. Okay, fine. We give up.
Even the calendar's long in this industry.
Yeah, and that's the problem is when you have these different pieces of infrastructure, technology infrastructure, whether you're talking about the moon or Mars or even low Earth orbit, if all of those pieces are being developed by different companies on a commercial basis, as opposed to a government program where the government can keep on funding one and keeping it alive long enough for the other pieces to come together, it doesn't work because it's not coordinated. I think the industry is trying to get better about that, but I still see a lot of the same business plans where we're going to put something on the moon, and hopefully 5 to 10 years from now our customers will exist on the moon. Do we have any influence over that? No, not really, but a lot of people are talking about it, so maybe it'll happen. That's not a solid business model.
Right.
So there needs to be more coordination. My feeling is that if that coordination is driven by investors who understand the concept of a portfolio approach, and if you want one part of your portfolio to succeed, you need to invest in several other things as well to make sure that it all works together. Then that's one possible approach. The other approach is simply to make sure that all of those companies have their markets on Earth that will sustain them long enough for those space customers to finally show up.
Yeah, and you keep coming back to that. Yeah.
And then on the financial infrastructure side, again, we have this huge disconnect between expectations and where the money is coming from. And I shared this with you on another conversation we had, but you look at where the private investment comes from for space versus other industries. And it's about 10% of it is angel investors. That's the same across the board. When you get to VC, other industries, it's roughly 30% maybe. Space is more like 36 to 40%. And then on the corporate side, most industries, it's down around 10 or 11. Space is more like 25%. And then all those other sources of capital are a relatively small part of what space is bringing in. So, the industry itself is setting itself up for either that quick VC timer, deliver or die, or, and in the case of the corporate money, deliver and be acquired. Those are the outcomes that we're setting up. So this is why we're trying to say, okay, what other things can we do? Can we build attractive portfolios of space companies for investors so that they can spread their risk across multiple things, but also coordinate those companies, which is another way of reducing investor risk. And some people don't want to do that, and so we just try to sort out the risk appropriate investment vehicle.
Right. Right. And that other conversation you referred to was you and I were on a panel with our SSPI India organization in the U.S. India Business Chamber of Commerce, talking to Indian entrepreneurs in the space sector, right?
Right.
So, that's another industry that's, trying to emerge. And some of the things that you're saying, again, they're going to be encountering problems with as we go forward as well. But I have to ask you, Micah, before I go back to Robbie, so where is the opportunity in infrastructure as it relates to perhaps a portfolio approach? Is there something that people should be looking at with their business models? Any place we can direct them?
You mean a specific piece of infrastructure?
Yeah. Is there one
really
area
needs
that's just so
investment?
lagging right now? And same question to you, Robbie, if you'd like, but is there one area so lagging right now that you would say, hey, you know what? You should be thinking about making a play here?
I think for the most part, there are companies that exist that are trying to tackle all of the different pieces that are needed. You have to identify what your goal is first.
Mhm.
That's really the key thing. So if your goal is, say, a human presence on the moon in a sustained manner, there probably are enough companies trying to do the different pieces, but some of those pieces are terribly underfunded. And so, if your goal is to achieve that, then you have to say, okay, what do we need? How do we make sure that those pieces get funded? And that's more the approach that I would take. I see there's a question in the chat about, why wouldn't an investor fund an ecosystem instead of just a business?
Yeah, that's a good question, Adam.
And the answer, from what we've seen, and I think it's changing, but in the past, people thought, well, I just want to invest in a particular business. It's probably launch or spacecraft manufacturing because those sound really cool, and I think it's going to do well, and that's good enough for me, and I'm going to put the rest of my money into something else. So it's this lack of understanding that you need the ecosystem in order for those space investments to really deliver value. But if all you want to talk about to your friends is how, oh yeah, I put money into a rocket company, you can absolutely do that.
Right. But Robbie, that's not where the action really is, right? And certainly not there for you. Again, when you look out at the ecosystem and the landscape, where are the gaps in terms of the infrastructure that might be an obstacle to allowing Sedaro to fire off the way it needs to going forward?
I think the financing infrastructure that Micah mentioned is essential to our growth, as far as like what technologies are needed. I think for for us to kind of continue improving spacecraft and space technologies and seeing kind of dramatic improvements and progress. I naturally believe that it's really updating the processes and the software behind these systems.
Sure.
Space is like archaic, at least the ones who produce the most things and get the most money in how they build things. And it's extremely difficult, primarily due to cultural reasons rather than technical, to realize big changes there. We're not building a lot of raw material and sending it to space, relative to the amount of hours that are put in, and the amount of smart people that put time into building these things. And software is how you manage that complexity and make it more efficient. So I think that's where the biggest technical opportunities are, more like 20 years out, rather than someone building a bus cheaper again, for example. Yeah. But on the financing side of things, I mean, we're always navigating, this complicated environment where you have to tell a different flavor of story to whoever you're talking to. There's the traditional part of the industry that wants heritage and reliability. There's the VC part that's like the complete polar opposite, that wants you to, they need you to be pitching something that's sexy and unrealistic, honestly, right, to believe that you're going to go for it, that you're not just there for a check and not going to come back and keep kind of sinking the commitment in and buying big. so that they can tell their LP or their LPs that, you know, they're returning money quickly and value quickly. I think we've landed somewhere where we can do both. You know, with the market that we're supporting now, in space, we can say, here we have heritage, we're doing things, and then say there's this future promise. You know, if things blow up with digital twins because autonomy becomes more and more important, then we can still pursue that in parallel. But you know, not the cleanest story, so it makes it challenging. I'd love to have a financing partner who's more aligned with, you know, our actual you know, genuine kind of middle of the road feeling for things, balanced feeling for things.
Sure. Yeah, sanity's a good place to be. Joe Fargnoli, it's time for the New York Minute. We'll get back to the questions, guys, in the conversation, but I wanted to bring in Joe. Joseph, I guess you and I are going to have to stop building that satellite fleet. We got to get away from the bus business.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lou, and I want to thank Micah and Robbie for the great conversation. I've been sitting here patiently. You know, this is really a good conversation, and we have to look at things in historical perspective and proportion. When I think about, I've been in the space industry 30 years myself, and when I think about Micah's comments about the interest really picking up around 2015, I would argue it was actually a few years before that. And when I think about the generation of what I'll call the froth in new space, I would have to say it was really Elon's success with Falcon 9 that started getting people thinking about, hey, what could we do if launch were massively less expensive? Traditionally, launch has been a barrier to getting into space. The launch cost has been a barrier. Back when we were using all basically government vehicles, they were a good value, but they were expensive, and people were not thinking about commercial space. You can thank our friends of the Founders Fund, who did a lot to beat the bushes to help bolster their investment in SpaceX, along with Steve Jurvetson at DFJ. So there was a lot of froth created in the industry about the excitement and the potential of commercial space, you know, hopefully as a way to fund the ambitions to go to Mars. And that whole vision seems to be really what's at the root of this. You know, I'll admit we're in a bit of a hangover phase right now, right? We as Americans rarely do things modestly and moderately. When we're in, we're in. And I think as an industry and as an investment community, we've gone pretty hard at commercial space. But you know what? I've been to this show before. There was a little thing 25 years ago called the internet, where I think we kind of, on a smaller scale, duplicated this situation, where we felt that this was a game-changing opportunity. It was going to change the way things happened, and we wanted to make sure the U.S. was in the lead. So we went out there and invested in a whole bunch of things. Some were smart, some were maybe not so smart, and we crashed hard. One could sit back and smirk and say, what a bunch of fools, we never should have done that. But I'll argue that this is implicit in the American experience of having a great vision, daring greatly, putting capital at risk, putting our time and our reputations at risk, and trying to do new things. And in many cases, falling short. And some could walk away and say, that's the end of the story. But as Americans, it's not the end of the story. We pick up the pieces, we reconstitute, we examine the market dynamics that we fell short on, we laugh at ourselves, we brush ourselves off, we pick up and we move forward. If Mike is talking about a new space, I will offer you a new space that is certainly coming. That's triple new space.
Ooh, 3.
What is going to happen when Starship takes off and it's successful and it's taking 100,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit? What's going to happen when Blue Origin finally gets their vehicles launched? And now Jeff Bezos, who in my opinion has the greatest vision of the commercialization of low Earth orbit of anybody, is able to regularly bring heavy mass to low Earth orbit. I will argue that many of these brainchild concepts that perhaps have fallen short may find a place in a new ecosystem when that next iteration of increase in launch efficiency come to fruition. I don't disagree rather with any of the conservatism and chuckles at some of our new space ventures. Okay, there are some faux pas that we've made. However, one of the biggest issues, in my opinion, is that we've treated space like software. As an industry, we've wanted to pretend that you can use the lean startup methodology as it's used for software in space. And I think, those of us who have experience in space know that space itself is not exactly like software. There are similarities, but not exactly. So that question of, what is the model? I accept the view of the new model being something we've got to consider beyond what was the new model. And I hope I'm not confusing people, okay? But there is a place for that. And I think we've got to stand back and recognize, where was lean startup methodology the right thing to do in space, and where was it the wrong model in space? I will, however, argue with the point that commercial space cannot and will not flourish. I will argue that many of our successful ventures as Americans start with a heavy dependence on government funding. We've discussed as a group the airline industry. Right? Initially, there was very little commercial investment in airlines. There was a lot of in development of aircraft. There was a lot of government investment, but that's proven to fall into a place now where there's a healthy commercial market and there's a healthy government market. I think we're going to see that continue to evolve in space. And we need to really be cognizant of these previous models and patient as we look at space. We will make mistakes. We will misstep. We will misjudge the dynamics of the market. But to our credit as Americans, we go boldly and we dare to examine, where are there brand new models? I'm sorry, but 25 years ago in the internet market, nobody knew what was going to work, but we knew some things were going to work. 25 years later, we've massively improved the efficiency of our national operations and of international commerce. So one can laugh at the failures of the internet cycle, or one can say they were casualties, but we've built on that. We've made a better world from that. And lastly, I like to think historically, right? I think of our movement into space as I think of the settlement of the West. And I think, what was the role of government in the settlement of the West? And there's no doubt that there was a role. Some will question how it was conducted, but there's no doubt that there was a role of providing basic fundamentals. But then there was space for the American spirit to come in and venture west and create new industries and new communities. And I think that's what we're going to see happen here. I think this is a great conversation. There's enough room for all different points of view. And I really thank Micah and Robbie for bringing their perspectives. And Robbie, if you've got Phil, I can see her on as an advisor. You guys must be a great company.
Very good. We've got a couple of minutes left. Joe, thank you very much. And we'll hit Rick Tumlinson with that new idea next month when he's on as well. But I want to get a reaction to the reaction, since we're doing new news. Let's get a reaction to the reaction. Micah, what do you think of Joe's editorial this month?
Clearly I need to clarify. 2015 was when we started to see the surge of investment, but you're absolutely right. The interest was there before. And so there were a handful of companies like SpaceX that were getting some investment and getting up and running earlier. But if you look, that's when the curve really starts to take off. As far as the commercial future of space, I certainly believe it could happen. Yes, I would like it to happen. Absolutely. It will not happen by lying to investors today about the existence of a sufficiently large commercial space market. So, managing expectations, communicating them clearly in ways that investors and non-space people understand. I think that is very important for the industry to regain some of the trust that it has lost in the past couple of years. And that is substantial based on my conversations with investors. So that's a challenge, but it can be done. And so the other thing that I would say goes along with the great American spirit that you were referring to is learning from mistakes. So unfortunately, I'm still seeing companies that are acting like it's 2015. And it's the same pitch that we saw back then. It might work for them. I have my doubts. But I'm also happy to say I see companies where a CEO like Robbie is making sense when I hear him talk about how he's thinking about it, how he's looking at other markets, how he's building a business model that will truly generate value for investors. And that's fantastic. That gives me hope.
Robbie, I think you are the spirit of America that Joe so articulately referred to in terms of what you're doing. I think Micah's right. You're doing what the Buddha would say. You're playing the middle way, going the middle way, getting some balance into the business model. obviously the space market is not software, Joe said. What's your reaction to what you heard?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad I gave you a little bit of hope, Micah. You gave me a little bit of hope as well from the financial side of things, and I love what Joe said, and kind of that balancing positivity and perspective. I mean, all the whatever degree of disappointment and failure there's been, people are learning from it, and hopefully it's a little bit of an overcorrection. And I think of it, it's convenient for me to think of it as a reason for the customer to change, or the financing people to change, rather than myself. So from that alternate perspective, given that the government is such a massive and important, it's basically all the market, a very, very large section of the market. You can't, I don't think, survive, as Micah pointed out earlier, without pursuing them as a customer. The way that they do acquisition needs to improve. It's really hard for companies like us to get in unless we just get absorbed by a prime contractor, or get rolled up by private equity into a services company to help them differentiate their offering or something. And then I think you dilute a lot of the value that a new business with new approaches, new technology could provide, right? So they need to update acquisition processes, let us in, speed up their sales cycles, and then we can also make more compelling pitches to the folks that are financing us, and raise more money and kind of feed the cycle that way. And then on the financing side of things, I just wish it was more broadly acceptable to have a more conservative estimates and approach to things. And I'm seeing that. I mean, we found VCs that have been a great fit, and I didn't know how to be, or what the expectation was, his first time raising, second time raising. And we managed to find people who had those more reasonable expectations, because they came from traditional space and then are, in this VC position. So seeing that, as opposed to folks that come with a pure VC perspective, commercial VC, into the space sector, that's been really nice. So there's a little bit of that change. I'm encouraged by it, and I'm down with the positivity and optimism from Joe.
And they understand the business as well. That's great. We'll come back to you guys with audience questions. We'll ask people in our audience to bring their questions out. And thank you so much for that. Tamara, let's just make a few announcements here. I mentioned we'll have Rick Tumlinson on next month. We'll be back on our regular cadence the third Wednesday of the month. So we're excited about that. What else do we have? Space Business Qualified. If you're a growing company like Robbie Robertson's and the ones Micah manages and is helping to grow, help them learn the business of space. SSPI and SatProf and the Global VSAT Forum have developed an online course for people who want to learn the business of space and to be better employees. You can take a test there. You can take a free course as well now at spacebq.org. And SSPI WISE, our special interest group, is meeting on the 26th. Tamara, you want to give us some more information about that?
Sure. We're pretty excited that on October 26th, we're going to be welcoming members of the 20 under 35 cohort this year, who are being honored, as we mentioned earlier in the program, at the Future Leader Celebration next week. They'll be joining SSPI WISE for a conversation about the who, what, why, and how of allyship in the workplace. So everyone is welcome, and we hope that you'll come and join us for that conversation.
Thanks, Tamara. And that's for everyone, not just the cohort, not just women.
That's correct. Everyone is welcome.
Everyone is welcome. Okay, and everyone is welcome next month to the November Roundtable, and we'll be talking about roadkill on the Cislunar Superhighway, a topic that we're very keen to present to you, Joe in particular. So there seems to be some roadkill out there, and we'll tell you what that's all about when we get to it. So we hope you join. You can register at any time for that. Okay, I think those are all the announcements we have. And I'd like to ask Adam Adam Page, can you come on and ask your questions? Because you've been pretty engaged today. Would you? We'd love to have you.
Oh yeah, happy to speak. Thank you for having me. I'm over from the UK, so it's really refreshing to see all the camaraderie you have over in the States with the space industry. So one of the big issues we've got over in the UK is that we're trying a primarily market-led approach to space. Like, it's way smaller than the US. I think there's like $1 billion invested from the UK Space Agency, where it's like 50 billion from NASA. But yeah, they're trying this commercial approach, and I think one of the ways, one of the questions I was asking is like, well, what room is there for market makers? Like, I don't know whether, like, in history there was like charter towns where they provided a whole bunch of services and created an internal market for their service that they were ultimately trying to provide. Like, where do you see routes to those kind of setups in low Earth orbit? Because my business, ultimately, I'm trying to build open source space planes, and I want to get all of you guys to orbit.
Micah, you want to take that on? Start?
I've wanted to answer that question since I saw a version of it pop up in the chat from Adam. So thank you for asking.
How's your chance?
This is one of the challenges that the space industry really hasn't figured out, as far as I can tell. And let's set Leo aside for a moment and talk about the moon as an example, because this is what we're hearing. There's a rush to the moon. There's a race to the moon. Multiple countries, multiple companies. Everyone wants to get to the moon and figure out how to be the first one to operate in various ways. What is the original value to be created at the site of the moon? Because right now I can find a company who will sell me communication services for whatever I'm doing on the moon. I can find someone to give me transportation services. I can find navigation services. Nobody can actually tell me what I'm doing on the moon that's going to make money. I haven't seen anything really plausible on that, any business that is well-funded and tackling that question. And so if the only people you have there are people who are selling services to each other, you're really just taking money from Earth and putting it into these very interesting science projects on the moon. You're not creating value. It's the same as, early colonies being sent from Europe to the United States, where you had, silversmiths and bankers and other people, but no farmers. That doesn't work. You need to be able to create that original value from the place where you are. So, for Leo, I don't know. For the moon, I don't quite know yet what that source of value needs to be. I think right now we've all come to the conclusion that Leo and the other Earth orbits, the value comes from services that you are ultimately providing to people on Earth. So that's a very Earth-centric view. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's where all the money still is. But if you have ambitions to go and build, a truly cislunar economy or a Martian economy, you have to think about what that original source of value is going to be and what that market is going to be. And that is not clear at this time.
And it can't just be secure data centers like Lone Star and some of these companies are proposing?
You could do that if you can really make a case that it's going to be better than what you can get on Earth.
Much better, yeah. Robbie, you want to pick that up as well?
I just think Mike is, I really appreciated that. And I think he's the one more suited to get into the details on it. But I mean, I think first principles is to find, if you're trying to create a product or find an application for a product that you can use to guide the development, you need to identify people with real pain, like people that actually care. And with the, the space environment, the natural high probability, valuable applications that address a pain point and address it urgently because they need to care about doing it faster and cheaper than before, are probably, going to be government and at least in the current geopolitical environment, probably DoD or intelligence oriented. I just think that's where the most immediate and motivated pain tends to be, given who our near peer adversaries are. The space environment gives you a perspective and a global perspective. That's fundamentally what it's providing, at least for Earth oriented things. So that's where I tend to look first.
Guys, is the space debris market one in your mind that is one that can sort of take shape at scale that we may want to look at? I mean, Adam, our friend Adam asked a question about that earlier in chat.
I struggle with it. I don't know it because we don't pitch it, as the focus. It comes up. I feel like it's been in the zeitgeist very much so, like, popular culture, space, environmentalism. I worked for Mariba Jha when I was at AFRL, and he's privateer now, and he's space environmentalist, and I definitely respect and appreciate the mission of those things. But from a commercial perspective, I've heard people ask, like, what's the I heard an investor recently say they were doing research on a company that was doing like space orbit, basically orbit data, better orbit data, right? And they were asking a satellite insurer whether they consider debris at all in insuring a satellite, and they said no. We care about how well it's built and other things that are a million times more likely to influence the probability of failure than currently debris can contribute to. So I think at the very least it needs to be like a long-term perspective with some unique funding that can withstand to that timeline.
Yeah. Micah, I mean, Steve Wozniak, Alex Fielding are over there at Privateer. That's considered smart money.
Yeah. I would see it as a business endeavor that depends on other people caring enough to purchase the service. So it is very much limited in terms of how much it can grow. Either you're selling the service to some number of companies that decide they want to do it for some reason, to have that debris cleanup, or it's government mandated. And if it's government mandated, then how do you fund that? Is the government paying for it, or are they telling everyone, well, now you have to pay the cleanup tax as you launch your spacecraft, and so the funding stream goes that way. But even then, it's not something that creates value in its own right. From what I've seen, it's about improving the value of other companies, because in theory their spacecraft will crash less and be destroyed by debris less often. So it's not useless, but it's hard to see how that will ultimately drive the development of anything significant.
Thank you. And it gets back to what you were saying earlier, as both of you were saying, there has to be that compelling need, to put it simply. Joe, I want to bring you into the last part of this conversation as well, if you're still with us. Let's talk about that cislunar market that Micah sort of kicked off. What does make sense as a business? I mean, we're talking about niche businesses here today to some extent. What is the niche business that you could envision that would, significantly grow in a cislunar economy the way it's been described here?
I think Joe had to step away.
Oh, Joe's away?
Yeah, but can I jump in?
Please.
Yeah,
You're the producer.
I just have been kind of fascinated. Adam had dropped this word in the chat. He used the word bounty, and I've just been stuck on it since he said it. And it just captures my imagination, because it's such a private enterprise kind of thing, that if there was a government fund, he's mentioning NYSA possibly joining in and funding the idea of setting a bounty. And then you can have kind of a cowboy race to chase down space debris, which would be fun. I'd make that television series in a heartbeat. But also, right, it would start creating
Dog
some
the bounty
activity.
hunter goes to the moon.
Yeah. But it just seems like it scales it down enough that maybe smaller entities can just make a business of going and going getting stuff. And that might start creating secondary markets, which we haven't had a lot of chance to talk about today, but it's the thing that bothers me, is that I don't hear about enough about secondary markets. Like, and I think that's the point that Mike is also raising about where's the actual value coming from. So anyway, I'm going to stop now, but it just kind of captured my imagination.
Yeah, no, it's the same question. I was getting at it that way, in my way as well. But Micah, why don't you just take a whack at that, a niche business that, again, might fulfill some of those requirements that you outlined.
So my wife works with space telescopes, and I know it has long been a dream of some segments of the astronomy community to put a very nice telescope on the far side of the moon, where it would be protected from electromagnetic radiation from Earth and other things. So, that might be a niche business, and it would create value for the astronomy community. Again, however, you're talking about government funding ultimately for that. So, it's a little more challenging to build a business around that and to sell the government on that idea. But, it's the sort of thing that could happen if it becomes substantially easier to get to and from the moon.
Yeah.
So there's that. I do think, maybe more on the commercial side, there is still room for a real business to emerge around space resources, and harvesting those, whether it's from the moon or asteroids or other places. And that actually does fit my criteria of real value that's being generated from something in space, and then adding to Earth's economy, not just shuffling things out into space.
The farmers in the new world, so to speak.
Yeah,
or the new world
is building the business model to make that work. And there are actually some companies that I think are on the right track for that. So, again, like Joe was saying, we've seen the ones that got the hype, the internet bust and all the rest for space resources. Let's see if the next generation takes those lessons on board, figures out the business model, maybe does a little bit more on Earth to keep themselves afloat for as long as it takes, and go from there. And that, I think, could work, and that might actually be what unlocks the lunar economy.
Yep. Okay. Well, we're coming down to the end of the session here. And I do want to thank you guys immensely for making the time, as I said earlier, but also for the rich discussion. Joe Fargnoli for his New York Minute, Tamara for her producing skills, our friend Adam, who came on, that's a great question from the UK. I also want to thank Chris Ulrich and Keith Buckley, the CEO of Zytec, who were with us today and said it was a great session. We appreciate those comments. I guess last question to you guys, this is our hit and run session. Would you guys go to the moon to be buried? Space burial? Micah?
I don't feel any strong need to go to space, dead or alive, to be perfectly honest. So no. Just give me something nice and environmentally friendly here on Earth.
Give me an Italian restaurant. Okay.
And I'm good to go.
Robbie, can we send you?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, but you can send me if you want. I don't mind. But yeah, it's not a priority for me. I'm with Micah. We're boring, I guess, but I'll take it. If you're going to launch me, I'll take it. Maybe you could do a green. I just saw an announcement about a launch company that's doing electromagnetic rail. So that's like no exhaust, right? Maybe if they could do that, a little pellet. Yeah, I'll take it.
Still a space debris problem, possibly, but
okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, we all right. Noted. Gentlemen, thanks again. Thank the audience. Thank you, audience, for being so loyal. We thank our sponsors, and we will see you next month. And remember, let's make it a better satellite world every way we can. Let's go up and out and do it. Take care, everybody.
Take care, all.
Thank you.